Hey folks, Intel is a sponsor this week, and I welcome them because they're bringing some high performance developer tools for all of us. Check out Intel's Parallel Studio XE. I've talked about parallelism before on the show and the importance of using the complete instruction set, unlocking the power of the processor that your code is running on. Now, you all might be writing C or C++, Python, or even Fortran, but is your code building in such a way and written in such a way that it uses the latest techniques for vectorization, multi-threading, multi-node parallelization, or memory optimization? Intel Parallel Studio XE has a lot of new stuff for 2018 across all these languages. Get a free download at bit.ly.com/Parallel Studio XE, or certainly go and Google with Bing for Intel Parallel Studio XE, and get started boosting your app's performance with smart, parallel code with a lot less effort. Check them out, bit.ly.com/Parallel Studio XE. Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with John Alexander. He's a gamer and a content developer. And I'm going to talk to him about the Xbox Adaptive Controller. How are you, sir?
Wonderful, sir. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me about this.
Yeah, so this is out now, right? I can go and buy the Xbox Adaptive Controller for $99 or $100 US in stores or Microsoft stores?
Yes.
Somehow I thought it would be more expensive. Like I thought it would be like a thing, like it would be hundreds of dollars. It would be Xbox priced, but that seems like a very reasonable price for something that's going to open up gaming for a lot of people.
Oh, yes. One of the things when the Xbox Adaptive Controller had been announced and it was still in development, when they actually announced the price, it blew everyone's mind because normally when you have accessibility issues and you need to get special equipment for that, that can run in the hundreds of dollars very easily for some of the modified controllers. And so with the accessible controller, it allows you to get what you need for a very small price. Yeah, it's amazing.
So what is your mobility issue?
So my mobility issue is what they call hemiplegia. And what that means is that your entire one side of your body is affected. So all the systems on my right side actually, and you may be able to tell I have a slight lisp because it even affects the side of my tongue a little bit. Everything on my right side is affected, including I wear a size 7.5 shoe on my right and a 9.5 on my left. And
is the hemiplegia, it means like hemisphere?
Yeah. Like quadriplegia or hemiplegia means that the entire hemisphere or hemi side, I guess, never really thought about that, but is totally affected. So I have really no fine control on my right side, on my right hand at all. So I type with one hand and do pretty much everything with one hand. But when you're playing Xbox games, typically you need two hands. There's two triggers, there's two joysticks, there's the D-pad, there's buttons, there's, upper triggers, there's lower triggers, and it can be frustrating for people with mobility issues or sensory issues or vision or something like that, and they can't really play. So using the accessibility controller allows you to plug in all sorts of external controllers so that you can use. So for example, I use two Rock Band drum pedals for my triggers.
Yep. Really? Okay, so I have Rock Band and the Rock Band orange drum pedal. It's like the controller. It's orange, and I got it at Goodwill, and it has a 3.5 millimeter, looks like a headphone jack on the end of it.
Right. And so you can plug in on the back of the controller itself. There are 3.5 millimeter controllers for jacks for the controllers, and pretty much any button, any trigger, has a spot along the back that you can plug in. And the reason they did that, it's all in a line so that people with mobility issues or dexterity issues, it's not, they're not like stacked one on top of the other or anything. They worked a long time with different agencies, different charities, to really work out the design on this. And it was one of the things out of the Inclusive Technology Lab. And I don't know, Scott, if you've ever been there, but it's an amazing, amazing place that they do the designs for things like the accessible controller. And I know that several other companies and organizations have used the expertise now of the Inclusive Technologies Lab for different offerings.
Wow. Well, before we get into the techie parts of how
Right.
it works and what it does, let me back up a second. You've been a gamer for years, though. I mean, I've known you for, I don't know, 15 years. How were you playing Xbox before?
I was usually the standard meat target for my kids in Halo. I was the practice dummy. So I would, like, for example, if you're trying to play something that needs both joysticks, I would typically, either turn the controller around sometimes or put it on the side and then hit it with one part, and then try to move a little bit with the other. So, like, for example, in the first-person shooter games, you have the navigation where you're running around with your feet, but then you twist at the waist with the other one. And that's where I would usually have the problem. I'd have to move and then quickly twist with the waist. And by that point, I'm spawning again. So for the most part, for quite a while, I haven't played console-based games. I've just played PC-based games.
And then how did you do that? Was it because the PC, you've got the keyboard and the mouse and you can, rearrange things, maybe move the mouse to the right side, but you're still only trying to do all of this with just one hand.
You're still doing it with basically one hand. You can use some of the, like on the keyboard, the arrow controllers or, WASD or something like that with your other hand somewhat, and then move the mouse or whatever you need to. But still, it's kind of frustrating sometimes. And, so being able to do that, you kind of pick and choose the games you want to play. So I've been, for a long time been playing things like Civ and those sorts of things, which aren't as much of a Twitch game as other things.
So there's a huge gaming community, though, out there before the Xbox Adaptive Controller that would just basically say, we're going to solve this, whether we have support from a company or not, right? There's like the Able Gamers Charity, and there's Special Effect, and there's Cerebral Palsy Foundation. People were building solutions I've seen out of wood and tape and wires that they made themselves, and this was a very DIY community. Like they were gonna game, and no one's gonna stop them.
Right. In fact, that's a good point. Back in the early 80s, when I had my Atari, there was an article in Atari Age at the time that showed you how to unscrew it and then rewire the circuit board so you could make it a left-handed controller.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So I did that so that I could use the fire button on the left-hand side. But there have been so many charities and people just spending their own time as makers to help other people modify different controllers or hook them up to maybe a breath, like a straw, so you could use that for the fire button or something like that, to allow people to escape the prison, if you will, or the frustration of having a body a mind that's trapped inside this mobility limited body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I understand that a couple of years ago, the kind of famous modder Ben Heck, BenHeck, created Xbox One single-handed controllers, which solves the problem for a single-handed person. But there's a diversity of limited mobility issues, right? Someone might not simply have only one arm. Like you can use your other hand to do some stuff. Like it could be a trigger hand, right?
Right. I can use it to grasp. I can use it on anything, coarse ability, not fine ability. I can grasp. So I can, use it for for a trigger. It's just harder to do, especially with the way that the controller is molded.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really interesting because the way that the adaptive controller came about was in 2014, and I don't remember who it was that was scrolling through Twitter, but they saw a tweet by Warfighter Engaged, who's a nonprofit organization that provides gaming devices to wounded vets, and so they saw this photo, and they reached out to Warfighter and started learning how difficult it was, and so there was a hackathon at the 2015 Ability Summit, and a group of employees decided to put together a team to develop a solution for accessible gaming. And so they worked with Ken Jones, who's the leader of Warfighter Engaged, and they developed at that point a gaming device that used Kinect to track a gamer's movements and translate them as if they were inputs from a traditional wireless controller.
Wow. And it does make you wonder, though, why it took so long. Like, if you were hacking your Atari in the 80s, doesn't it feel like this should have been a thing a long time ago?
Yeah, I think part of it is that, sometimes people are just going about their lives and they don't see it. And, it's not that it's good or bad or anything. They just don't see it. I think really a lot of companies now, for whatever reason, are really trying to focus on accessibility. I mean, if you look at Tommy Hilfiger now has a line of Tommy accessible clothing. And so they have magnetic clasps for your buttons for your shirt. So it still looks like buttons on a dress shirt, but it's actually a magnetic clasp.
Oh, wow.
And Nike, I tried these on and they didn't work for me, but they have, as part of their fly line, a high top that zips all the way around with Velcro, so that you can basically, instead of using shoestrings, you can zip all the way around it, and it kind of opens the shoe up and then kind of zips it around there. So
see, these are small and clever design things that can fundamentally change how someone is able to just move through their everyday life. Like, this is just it's the organizational willpower to do it.
And that's why, one of the reasons why I love Microsoft, because they decided to do this. They put their money where their mouth was, and they created something that's very affordable and very, very flexible. You can use it on both Windows 10 and on the Xbox itself. And so you can configure it however you need to. In fact, it has two oversized buttons, and I've got two other oversized buttons. So I just took a picture of a regular Xbox controller with the XYAB, blew it up, and then put it on the buttons and created that diamond configuration, and use the buttons that way with my right hand.
Interesting. So we're on a podcast, of course, so people will have to go and link and go and search for images for this. But let's describe it. It looks like a DJ turntable. It's a white rectangle. It's a very attractive controller. It matches the Xbox style with two big black buttons on it that are several inches wide that look like they could be turntables, but they're actually buttons. There's a small D-pad, presumably for setup, start and select buttons, but it's rather Spartan. But if you flip it around on the back side, there's 19 3.5 millimeter jacks and multiple USB ports. This is not a controller as it is a controller toolkit.
Right. And that's the main thing, is that it's not necessarily the controller itself, but it's almost, I don't want to say it's a framework, but it's a platform.
It's an ecosystem.
Right. And the interesting thing about it is, on the controller itself, yes, it has a D-pad, and you can map the Xbox controller D-pad to that D-pad.
Oh.
You can also then, using a technology also that came out, I think in like 2014 or 2015, called Copilot. And Copilot is an Xbox technology that allows two controllers to work as one.
Right, and that's a software-based thing. I've actually done that with my kids before they became able to really play. I could move the head of the character and they could move the body, kind of thing.
Right. And in the same way, the accessible controller takes advantage of using Copilot. You can use it with a regular controller and then map from that controller onto. So if you want to use, in one hand you want to use the controller and then the big buttons of the accessible controller, you can absolutely do that. And there's a little button on the accessible controller with 3 lights next to it, and those are for the mapping profiles that you use. So you get into the Xbox and you turn on Copilot, and it says, okay, do you want to map these things? Mm-hmm. And so, like, for example, I've mapped the right joystick to the D-pad on the accessible controller.
So you can map anything to anything. And
right.
then on the back, these 3.5 millimeter devices, this is basically a headphone jack, but it's not for headphones. We've all looked at these plugs before. They usually have stripes. There's either like a mono or a digital input. There's a stereo or 3 stripes, and you can use those for digital, like a button pushing it on and off, or for analog things like joysticks. And it'll support all of these different things for switches or buttons. Totally up to you. So you can do remapping in software and physical mapping in hardware.
Yes.
So that means that, like, this button that you have, the one from Rock Band, is that an on-off, or is that a trigger where you could push it slightly and it's like an analog input?
You can push it slightly. It's when you plug the pedal into the back of the controller, it has a little symbol for right trigger. You can plug that. You plug that right in there, and yeah, it is. I believe it's got to be analog because it totally handles the pressure just fine.
That's amazing. So it's a big foot trigger. Mm-hmm. And if I'm putting all of this in the show notes because I want people to see these if they can. It's pretty amazing. It's an ecosystem because it's open and it's not being prescriptive. And I think this is important. Mm-hmm. The adaptive controller is not saying use it like this. It's just it's a series of ports and possibilities. And if you go on the show notes and look at our under assistive, these are the accessories you can get. Like, you can mount it to your leg. You can mount it to your wheelchair. They have wheelchair arm mounts for the controller itself, or mounting it in any way that you want. So there's a whole ecosystem around it. One of these ones that's really interesting is called the Quad Stick. So it's a sip and puff mouth stick that can be used to map directly to the Xbox controller.
If you want to fire with your mouth, you can do that. I believe there's also somebody makes an eye tracking device that you can use. So you can use that to move. There's all sorts of things.
Oh, wow. Oh, and it would actually map directly to the joystick. So it's a head tracker, but it's the Xbox doesn't know it is. It just thinks it's a joystick.
Right. And you talked about the wheelchair mount, and the way that happens is if you flip it over, there are several screw mounts in there of different sizes that match a lot of medical devices you would use. So it matches right to like a wheelchair mount.
Oh, so if I understand correctly, you know how when you, like, I've bought cameras and there's a standard for how the camera attaches to the tripod, and then maybe you'll look at another device that you purchase and you go, oh, this fits on top of the tripod because it uses the same screw style and size. So you're saying that there are standards for mounts, so all of these things just physically work together.
Right. And so it's really neat the amount of thought that has gone into this. And
yeah,
one of the things, I'm looking at a picture of this right now, and on the backside of the controller with all those 3.5 millimeter jacks, there are symbols on the top, so you can look down and see which ones you're needing to. But then also on the back, in high contrast in black, larger, there are symbols right underneath each one of those as well. So they've really thought about the nuances that you might need. I was involved in the beta program of this, and even between the last beta of the hardware and the release, they put a very subtle curve in the top so that it would be a little bit better ergonomically.
Interesting. And the other thing I think is worth pointing out is while it's trying not to be prescriptive, it's allowing for accessory makers to themselves be prescriptive depending on what you need. For example, I figured, oh, well, and again, this is speaking from a relatively able-bodied perspective, I figured, oh, well, maybe they'll just make big buttons, like big giant buttons, right? Which is a very simplistic way for me to think, right? But I go and I look at these accessories from a company called AbleNet. They have big switches, which makes sense, but they also have micro light switches that will click with just the slightest amount of touch, or switches like a button that happens when you grab it or grasp it or pull it to one side. Or they've got a jelly bean switch, which is squishy, and not going to hurt you if you pound on it. Like, these are all different ways to send binary information, but each one it doesn't look like a switch in the simplistic way I was going to think that it would look like.
Right, and that's a neat thing. I'm glad you brought up AbleNet, because they've done a wonderful amount for a lot of people. And if you go out to AbleNet, one of the things you'll see on some of the pictures is it looks like there's almost a coating over the button.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason, like almost a plastic transparent coating over the button, the reason that is for people that have issues controlling their mouth. I know of a young man who has wasted several controllers because as he gets excited, a lot of drool comes out, and it destroys the controller. So they even take those sorts of things into account. And so it's amazing the small details that they really look at to be able to make sure that it's the best experience possible.
A big thank you to our sponsors, because they make this show possible, and I hope that you support them the way they support us. Progress Software is the creator of the most comprehensive developer toolkit for building modern apps on the market today, Telerik DevCraft. With more than 1,100 Telerik.NET and Kendo UI JavaScript components and controls, you can easily build modern, high-performance web, mobile, and desktop apps, as well as chatbots. The toolset also includes reporting solutions, automated testing, and productivity tools, and comes with a range of support options. New this year is a free online training program for all license holders. With this, alongside thousands of demos and source code available, comprehensive documentation, and a full assortment of Visual Studio templates, you'll be up and running with the Progress Telerik and Kendo UI controls in no time. Download a free 30-day trial today at telerik.com/Hanselman. That's TELERIK.com/Hanselman. And this device has software to support it, and it's firmware updatable, and it plugs into Windows. So you program it, you get it all set up, and then you can game both on Xbox and on in your Windows games and your Steam games.
Yes.
And then you just have to map it however you want. And I noticed that there's also a one-handed joystick. It looks kind of like a Wii nunchuck.
Mm-hmm.
Have you tried that as a one-handed user?
I haven't. I've used the Wii nunchuck several times, but I haven't actually used that one yet. The next one I'm actually getting is called a 3D controller. I don't remember the name of it, but it allows you to move things basically with your feet, completely with your feet. It's almost like a balance board that you might use like when you're doing Pilates or something.
Oh, right. There's the 3D rudder foot controller.
That's it. It's the 3D rudder. And so I've got that actually on order to play with, to see how I can use that. And one of the things I want to potentially do with that is help people with accessibility issues have a better experience programming. And so maybe with the 3D rudder, they can move the mouse a little bit better, or find a way to create some macros for it when they're using something like Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio or whatever, to be able to help that a little bit more.
Now, I think I know the answer to this question, but I've watched my 10-year-old, my 12-year-old kind of like develop their skills to be able to, like, when you first start like a first-person shooter, you're walking around, you can't quite figure out that the right thumb is your head and the left thumb is your body, and you end up looking up in the sky or looking down. And eventually that becomes, second nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
After you've set this controller up and your custom accessories the way you want it, whether it be on a mount of your own or a table or however you've set yourself up, how long does it take and what is it like? Does it become intuitive where you just immediately know that moving your knee to the right is the right trigger and moving it to the left is the left trigger, or however you've set it up? Does it become natural?
Yes. It's just it becomes a habit, just like with anything else. At least it has in my case. And the neat thing is that if you have multiple people that want to use this, you can have multiple profiles set up. Or maybe something works a little bit better. Another configuration works better for a driving game versus a first-person shooter game. You could have another mapping and change the controls around to what makes sense for that particular game.
Wow. Okay. So the controller, I understand, is USB-C. It's got a battery inside. It really acts like an Xbox controller. It uses the same Xbox wireless. It pairs just like an Xbox controller because it is an Xbox controller.
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, the Xbox thinks it's an actual controller. And they've, I know the Exclusive Lab, when they were working on this, and the Xbox's hardware team even went so far as to make sure that as you're using this on like for online tournaments or stuff or things, it uses the anti-cheating things that Xbox would normally use anyway. So it's not anything that would be a competitive advantage or anything like that. They've tried to make sure that it just levels the playing field.
So speaking of leveling the playing field, at the beginning of this podcast, you told me that when you were playing before, you were effectively you said the meat target for your kids.
Yes.
Has this level, have you been able to pwn your kids? Because that really is the goal here.
Right. That's the gold standard. And I am now able to at least hold my own. Mm-hmm. I get maybe a couple of or 2 or 3 kills in now before I get killed. So I'm a little more challenging meat target. So, but I have been able to play almost all the way through Fallout 4 with this controller in the combat scenes and everything else very effectively. And so I'm super excited about that. And then I don't know if you saw the launch video that I'm in with my fake family.
They give you a fake family?
Yeah. At the and we do it it was filmed at the Exclusive Lab, but the game that I'm playing, they just took about 15 or 20 minutes of us playing the games. I'm actually really into it because it was like a Street Fighter game, and I was actually winning against the young man that I was playing against. Whereas before, I would have gotten in a couple of shots, but now with the ability to use those buttons and remap the controller, it just opened things up, and it makes an otherwise, I don't want to say an otherwise dreary existence, because it's not really, but it does. It's, you want to play the games because you're a gamer, and it gives you that ability to feel like, yeah, I can participate.
Mm-hmm. Something else that's worth pointing out, you kept mentioning the attention to detail and the little things. They even made the packaging accessible. So, like, how often have we all had to go and find a knife or struggle to open up the cardboard? This thing kind of unfolds itself like a flower, and it has this amazing packaging, both the cardboard around it and then the internal box. It's not packaging that you would want to throw away.
No, actually, I still have the beta version, and I'm trading that in for the actual release version, and I can't wait to see the packaging, because the listeners ought to know that they spent 4 years on the controller, but they spent an entire year on the packaging. And the way you open it is with a little ring that you just pull back, and it pulls some very not real sticky tape off. And then, it just unfolds like a flower, but then it also slides out gently on a cardboard kind of lift, if you will, so that you don't have to, you can just kind of scoop it off if you need to.
Yeah, exactly. There are these loops, and they set a standard for no teeth.
Yep.
For the package designers, because people with limited mobility will often have to use their teeth to open packaging, which is not the best out of box experience.
No, but you get pretty good at it sometimes.
Yeah, unfortunately. So we can get this where? Microsoft stores and online?
Yes. Right now, I believe it's just at the Microsoft stores and online. But I have a feeling that once production gets totally ramped up and everything, that you'll be able to get it at Best Buy or wherever, at your local store, maybe.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm curious also, do you know if it has a headset adapter as well? Like, the thing that I'm always impressed with my Xbox controllers is I just plug headphones in and they wirelessly bring the sound over. So back in the day, I used to actually have wireless headphones that were custom and separate. I plugged into my stereo, and now the Xbox controller is itself a a headphone transmitter.
Yep. I'm not sure about the wireless headphones. I would assume that since it's using, it can be done. You can use it as a wireless controller. I would assume that.
Right. Well, it acts as a wireless headphones, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Right. Well, because there is a 3.5 inch or 3.5 millimeter jack on the left side that has a headphone above it. Yeah, you can use headphones with it.
Fantastic. See, I think I don't have mobility issues, but I have had mobility issues. And I think this is a thing for those of us who are listening to this podcast who may not have those issues right now. You just never know. I've had frozen shoulder surgery where I had no mobility in my left arm for 2 years. I had carpal tunnel surgery on my right hand, and I've got a bone spur in my thumb right now where my right hand gaming is painful. We as relatively able-bodied people should not think about technologies like this as being, this is just for people in wheelchair, or this is just for people with serious mobility issues. This is really about making it for everybody. Like, this is what inclusion means. It's for players with different disabilities or different abilities, but it may be well for you someday if something goes awry in a body part that you don't expect. I did not expect to get frozen shoulder or have hand issues, but it's nice to know that controllers like this exist if I ever need them.
Yes, and it's just another way to, like you said, be inclusive and give an avenue to people so that they can participate.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks so much, John Alexander, for chatting with me today.
Scott, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
I appreciate that. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.